Let's face it, modern aviation is pretty boring sometimes. Most of the planes are already divided into different types, and in each they are practically identical. But among all this crowd of twins, there will always be one that makes you want to ask, what is that? Hello aviators, Sky here, and today we're looking at an unusual plane with unusual capabilities. I present to you the An-72. The history of this aircraft begins in the 1960s, as we like it. Military transport aviation, like aviation in general, was developing at a furious pace, but in its own special way, which can be seen just by looking at the model lines. Almost all aircraft were turboprops. There were a few jets among them, mainly the largest types. The nuance is that turboprop engines were reliable and economical, allowed flying quite slowly, supporting short takeoffs and landings, including on unpaved runways. For military transports, this was very important. Jet engines gave high speeds, but could not boast of much else. And aviators tried to solve this problem for a long time. How to make a fast jet aircraft while maintaining its capabilities for short takeoffs and landings. And the solution was found in a small aerodynamic trick. I think everyone is familiar with the situation. You want to pour hot tea, tilt the teapot over the cup, and the treasured hot drink seems to stick to the body, flowing down it right on the table. The same phenomena occur not only with tea. A flow encountering a surface begins to move around it, deviating from the original course, and at a decent speed, pulling this surface. Meet the Coanda effect, which is actively used in many different areas. Yes, ladies, your beloved Dyson is also sitting on it. Aviators have been playing with it for quite a long time. For example, special nozzles blowing air towards the flaps were integrated into some military aircraft, allowing to increase lift and reduce flight speeds during takeoffs and landings. But the effect could be used on a larger scale. For example, to get even more lift by arranging the engines so that the jet stream would blow over the wing. This idea had been in the air for a long time, but by the end of the 1970s, aviators from different countries had taken it up seriously. The AMST, or Advanced Medium STOL Transport Program, was initiated in the United States, which was supposed to create a short takeoff and landing jet transport. Two concepts were developed within the program. The first was led by McDonnell Douglas with their YC-14. Basically, a classic jet transport with a trapezoid wing and 4 engines. Such a design and high thrust-to-weight ratio were supposed to give good indicators. The second was led by Boeing and their YC-14, and it was more interesting. The concept was based on the Coanda effect, with the installation of engines on the wing. In the USSR at that time, there were also two similar concepts, and both were developed within the walls of the Antonov Design Bureau. At first, the main one was the classic version, the An-70, with engines suspended under the wing. But interest in it over time faded in favor of the second version, with engines on the wing, like the YC-14. The Coanda effect and its bonuses were extremely tempting. Calculations and wind tunnel tests gave promising results. The lift force could be increased by as much as 20%, and the designers preferred it. Having completed the first stages, Antonov presented the project officially. The aircraft was supposed to retain the flexibility and low demands of turboprops, while becoming jet-powered and achieving much higher flight speeds. It was necessary to explain why the aircraft looked unusual, but the prospects turned out to be very interesting to the military. An official order followed. Airplane 200, as it was initially named, was supposed to have a lifting capacity of about 5 tons, be able to perform airborne landing operations, and of course, be able to work on short, unpaved runways. That is, more or less to become a replacement for light transports, like the An-26, but with a jet power plant and a high cruising speed. The turboprop flew at 270 knots, and the newcomer promised more than 380 knots. From that moment on, the work was carried out very quickly. While the first research within the walls of Antonov began around 1972, by 1977 it began to be realized in metal and acquired its name. Airplane 200 grew into Izdelia 72, and then into An-72. Finally, from the concrete of the Gostomel airfield near Kiev, the first prototype rose into the sky. The An-72 took off on August 31, 1977, exactly 30 years after the An-2. Progress is obvious. The testing of the aircraft was quite difficult. It had to suffer with the nuances of the Coanda effect. The jet flow around the wing was unstable and wandered depending on the flight modes. In addition, nuances arose in flight operations. The engines now not only pulled but also lifted, and in the event of a failure of one of them, a sharp imbalance in the lifting forces arose, and the aircraft could simply tip over. But from the prototype to prototype, the design and systems were adjusted, so all the problems were not critical. Especially since the shortcomings were more than compensated for by its excellent flight performance. With a normal load, it took off with a run of 450 meters, and its landing distance was only 350 meters. It felt quite confident both on concrete and on the grass. Meanwhile, thanks to its thrust-to-weight ratio and enormous lifting force, the aircraft turned out to be very maneuverable and fast climbing. The An-72 not only replaced the old turboprops, but also significantly surpassed them. So, it's time to get acquainted with the An-72. The plane is quite compact, 28 meters long, 32 meters wingspan, 8.75 meters high, a little bigger than the An-26. It's interesting in terms of materials. Short and rough landings did not promise comfortable loads, so the structure was significantly reinforced. This naturally led to overweighting, and to combat it, Antonov tried to lighten the elements wherever possible. New aluminum and titanium alloys, honeycomb panels and composites. The plane did not become light, but it allowed to win several hundred kilos. The most important issue was the power plant, but Antonov had thought about it before the An-72 appeared. Even during the An-60 project, an engine was created specifically for it. The D-36, the same one that was also installed on the Yak-42. The engine was very decent for its time. 3-spool with a titanium fan, a bypass ratio of 5.34 to 1, low fuel consumption and a thrust of up to 63.8 kilonewtons. In addition to the general advantages, it had a bonus that was important to the project. With a high bypass ratio, its jet stream was, well, not cold, but not as hot as usual, which is important for what I will describe next. Considering the specifics of the aircraft, we can say that the wing is also part of the power plant. The engines are placed in the cells integrated into the upper part and are pushed forward, so that the nozzles practically lie on the wing from above in front. Moreover, these nozzles are slightly flattened, which spreads the jet stream over a large area. This section itself is reinforced and has heat-resistant protection, so as not to burn during each takeoff. Hence my comment on why the cold exhaust of the engines was important. In addition to the Coanda effect, this design had another bonus. The engines were placed high, which minimized the risk of foreign objects getting in from the runway. One of the problems of jet aircraft, especially those operating on unpaved ground. The high-lift devices, considering the requirements, are very advanced. Around the center section, large slotted flaps are installed, and when released, the jet stream of the engines begins to flow around them, also increasing the lift. Further, there is another group of slotted flaps. In front, a pair of sections of large slats. On the wing, there are interceptors, 4 sections on each console, a full set, plus ailerons. The plane, of course, received a thrust reverser, but given the specific location, the mechanism is not quite ordinary. One huge bucket is installed in the upper part of the engine nacelle. The plane received a T-shaped tail, such that the stabilizer does not intersect with the exhaust. The landing gear was another challenge. Short takeoffs, rough landings, uneven ground. A difficult task, even for the Antonov engineers who were well versed in this topic. Many options were considered, including an air cushion, but in the end they decided to return to the classic with modifications. The front leg is a regular 2-wheeler. The main gear, 4 wheels on powerful shock absorbers, retractable into a fairing in the lower part of the fuselage. Each wheel is independent, and even if one of them fails, the plane can land on the remaining 3. This was quite enough. The aircraft control system was pretty good for its time. It combined both direct control and booster support. The cockpit received modern onboard systems, automation and navigation. Everything was simple and comfortable to control, and the total number of crew members varied from 3 to 5, depending on the tasks. The An-72 cargo hold is quite large, 2.2 by 2.1 meters in cross-section, 9 meters in length. The load capacity is 10 tons, which allows it to carry light equipment, various pallets and containers, up to 68 soldiers, and up to 57 paratroopers inside. The cargo ramp of the aircraft is interesting. During parachuting, it rolls under the fuselage, and on the ground it lowers to the ground, without the need to use additional equipment. And here, an attentive viewer will ask, what is this 10 tons load capacity? The An-72 was designed for 5. The thing is that the An-72 that took off in 1977 and the An-72 that we see in front of us are basically different planes. Are you ready to jump down the rabbit hole? The first public demonstration of the An-72 was held in 1979 at the Paris Air Show. There, the unusual aircraft showed everything it could do, even some elements of aerobatics, which impressed the people. And in the NATO classification, a new name appeared, Kohler. Not a great name, but in this case, it just needed to start with the letter C. And while it was delighting guests in Paris, a big battle for the production site was going on at home. Initially, it was assumed that the An-72 would be assembled at the Kiev aircraft plant, where the prototypes were made. But it was already overloaded, and there was simply no room to make the new model there. The Kharkov aircraft plant was chosen as an alternative site, but it was not easy there either. Kharkov for a long time specialized in Tupolev aircraft, which were very different from Antonov ones. It was necessary to change the technical process, update the equipment, and retrain the personnel, which meant additional costs and time. And here comes the Ministry of Civil Aviation, which, observing the advantages of the An-72, wanted to have such an aircraft on cargo and passenger lines. It would seem that additional demand is always useful, but everything turned out to be not so simple. Initially, the military transport was multifunctional, undemanding and nimble, but for a civilian aircraft its range and payload were too modest, and these figures had to be almost doubled. What a surprise! They had to make a cocktail of the Air Force and Aeroflot requirements. The updated An has grown in size. The payload has reached the target of 10 tons, and the range varies from 2,700 kilometers with a normal load to 4,700 in ferry flight. And these achievements had a price. The aircraft had become considerably heavier, 34.5 tons of maximum takeoff weight. The aerodynamic quality and thrust-to-weight ratio have decreased. In addition, larger weight and a larger wing have reduced the role of the Coanda effect to a minimum. If earlier it was 15 to 20%, now it is 5 to 7%. The flight speed is now about 380 knots maximum and 300 knots cruise, and the minimum has increased. The takeoff run is 870 meters, the landing distance is 650 meters. The new An-72 has become more interesting for commercial use and remains tolerable for military use. But from the point of view of aviators and engineers, I think, alas, a truly unique aircraft has turned into just a good exotic transport. This surprise did not please the manufacturers either. The Kharkov plant, which was already having a hard time switching to the new type, almost stopped when it turned out that the new type had also changed significantly. All this required even more expenses and time. As a result, the aircraft actually went into production only in 1985, 8 years after the first flight. Back then, this was very long. Nevertheless, the first serial aircraft showed themselves very well. Soon, due to its unusual appearance, especially when viewed from the front, it was given a new nickname, Cheburashka, because it looked very much like the famous Soviet cartoon character. But not everything was perfect. The design of the updated aircraft was not as reinforced as the original. It was possible to work on unpaved runways, but without extreme conditions, as it was originally planned. Plus, the aircraft was reliable but demanding in maintenance, and it was more difficult to work with high-mounted engines than if they were simply suspended under the wing. Plus, tests showed the aircraft's weakness in parachuting. It was too small for landing equipment, and the Coanda effect created wake currents in the tail, which did not make life easier for paratroopers. Demand from the military died down a little, and the airborne forces abandoned it altogether, preferring the An-12 and Il-76. Nevertheless, the aircraft surprised with its versatility. As it turned out, it remained quite maneuverable and undemanding, and felt great in different climatic conditions, from deserts to glaciers, and from the sea to the mountains. This fact became the starting point for the emergence of specialized modifications. The first of them was to be sent to the polar glaciers, where polar explorers still flew on the ancient Il-14. The modification, called An-72A, received many changes in the configuration and onboard systems for work on ice, patrols, and delivery of personnel and cargo. At the stage of entering serial production, it was renamed. Thus was born the An-74, one of the favorite birds of the Arctic and Antarctic. Subsequently, other civilian versions were released under the An-74 index, and the military retained the index An-72. Then came several other modifications: passenger, executive, cargo, search and rescue. The patrol An-72P was even armed with the Gesha-23L cannon, unguided missiles and aerial bombs. It was more of an anti-piracy tool than a Cold War weapon, but it worked well. For more serious matters, the An-72R was created, an electronic intelligence aircraft, and the An-71, the AWACS aircraft. Even more exotic than the original, the radar dish was placed on top of the reverse-swept tail fin, instead of the stabilizer, which in turn was moved down. Even naval versions for aircraft carriers were proposed, but they were not implemented. Heavy machines are not very friendly with sky jumps, and catapults were not used on Soviet ships. The serial production was developing quite quickly, exceeding the mark of 100 machines. But just when everyone was expecting the mark of 200 to be crossed, the Soviet Union collapsed. Demand within the country, or rather countries, fell sharply. Funding for the once rich industry collapsed, and established production collaboration fell apart. While in the late 1980s, early 1990s, 20 to 25 of them were made per year, at the beginning of the 21st century they were making at most a couple. Attempts to enter the commercial market were faced with the specificity of the aircraft. The plane was well suited for a number of special tasks, but on the commercial market it was inferior to purely cargo and passenger aircraft. Antonov engineers continued to fight for their plane, creating many modifications, including radical ones with the transfer of the engines under the wing. But the matter did not move forward much, and the priority shifted from attempts to remake the An-74 to the project of a new aircraft, the An-148. The finale was delivery of 2014. After the breakdown of production relations between Ukraine and Russia, it became practically impossible to work further. In total, at that time, 195 machines were produced. There are a lot of what-ifs in the history of the An-72. What would have happened if Antonov had continued to work with the An-60 project and made an aircraft comparable to the An-178 or C-390? They relied on the Coanda effect, which in practice turned out to be not so effective. I'll note that the Boeing YC-14 also didn't make it, and no one really widely used this concept later. How good was the original An-72, and what would have happened if it had gone into production? What would have been the fate of the project if the production had begun as planned several years earlier? What if, what if, what if? We have what we have, and that's about 100 flying machines, flying well and pleasing their small fanbase. Well, the project is over, but life goes on. We'll see what happens next. Fast flights on interesting planes, and soft landings to you.